Tonight on Primetime Politics, marking 4 years of war.
4 years on, Russia is failing militarily, strategically, and economically.
The Prime Minister is joined by other party leaders in Ottawa to mark 4 years of fighting in Ukraine. Coming up, we'll speak to Ukraine's ambassador to Canada about this grim anniversary and what he hopes Canada might provide Ukraine to support the war effort against Russia's illegal invasion. Also,
the booked money at this stage is $3.5 billion.
Building more housing for Canadian forces. Ottawa just unveiled the latest move to get more than 7,000 new units built. But will that be enough? We will speak to retired Colonel Michel Drapeau. And turning Ottawa's military-industrial strategy into reality. We'll examine the role emerging tech firms might play. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Today marks a grim anniversary for Ukraine, 4 years since Russia began its illegal invasion, bringing death and destruction to Ukraine, causing the displacement of millions of people, and perpetrating violations of international law. Today in Ottawa, Canada's political parties observed a moment of silence to mark the significance of this day and also to honor the victims of Russia's aggression. Take a listen now to what was said about the anniversary in the House of Commons this afternoon.
We are determined to ensure that Russia will never again be in a position to threaten Ukraine or the peace and security of Europe. Canada stands as a proud and active member of the coalition of the willing. Let me be perfectly clear. Our unity is strong and our commitment is absolute. We will stand with Ukraine, not only in this fight, but in the work that follows. Rebuilding its cities, restoring its infrastructure, and supporting its people as they recover from this unjust, tragic, and devastating war.
For 4 years, we have been inspired by the resilience and strength of the people of Ukraine. We've watched the entrepreneurs run their businesses within earshot of the front line. We have witnessed the ingenuity and innovation of everyone in Ukraine, of how they have been able to keep in this fight for 4 years, and how they're fighting and how they continue to evolve in this brutal war. A war, again, that the Kremlin thought they'd win in less than a week. And of course, we've witnessed the courage and selflessness of members of the armed forces of Ukraine. Not only are they fighting for Ukraine, but they're fighting for our shared values. Our values of democracy, freedom, and human rights.
We have to pour into Ukraine the help that they need so desperately. And with those words, I join all colleagues here. Slava Ukraini! Peace and victory to Ukraine.
The war has been horrific for Ukraine, with the Center for Strategic and International Studies estimating the country has seen over 500,000 military casualties, and that includes an estimated 140,000 deaths. Hundreds of Ukrainian children have also been killed, not to mention the nearly 20,000 children Ukraine says were abducted by Russian forces. Still, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke defiantly today, using the anniversary to express his ongoing belief that Ukraine will prevail and calling on all its allies, Canada, Europe, and the U.S., to stand firm in their support.
The threat hasn't become smaller. Yes, we are holding Russia back, but we have not yet guaranteed security. And only together can we do this together in Europe? Yes, together with America. And of course, we all understand that this is not an easy task to maintain transatlantic unity and cooperation in the current conditions. But I am grateful to everyone who, despite all the challenges, continues to preserve this globally important link between Europe and America, and between all the world's democracies.
the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as he addressed the European Parliament. Now, earlier I did have a chance to speak with Ukraine's ambassador to Canada, and during our interview, I asked him to share his thoughts on the current state of the war, the progress being made or not being made in peace talks with Russia, and what his country needs from Canada. Here now is my conversation with Ambassador Andrii Plakhotniuk. Ambassador, thank you for taking the time.
I'm pleased to be here.
I want to begin with today's anniversary, 4 years since Russia began its illegal invasion of Ukraine. And we've seen the images, we've seen the video. But I was wondering if you might share, as a Ukrainian, a citizen of the country, how this war has changed Ukraine.
Firstly, today we are marking 4 years of full-scale invasion. But actually, we should always remember that this war started in 2014 with illegal occupation of Crimea and some areas in the Donetsk and Lugansk region, which is eastern Ukraine. Certainly, this 4 years were very difficult for all Ukrainians, for ordinary citizens, for families, for soldiers, for government, for everyone. I mean, especially now, when we had to survive during this toughest winter. Because what we see on the ground, we see daily attacks on our energy infrastructure. And yes, we have a very cold winter this year. So it's very difficult, but at the same time, these 4 years were years of our resilience, of our unity, of our shared commitment to defend our land against aggressor.
Unity, solidarity amongst Ukrainians, but there's no denying that this war brought on by Russia, to be clear, this is Russia that started this war. It has brought a lot of death and destruction to Ukraine. But despite that, just over the weekend, we heard President Zelensky say that he still believes that Ukraine will emerge victorious and defeat Russia in this war. How true is that statement, given that Russia, 4 years in, is not giving up the fight?
They're continuing to target our infrastructure, to kill Ukrainians, and to bring atrocities. But for us, it's very existential. If we stop this war, there will be no Ukraine, no Ukrainians, because what Putin seeks for, he looks for total destruction of Ukraine, to erase our identity. So this is very important for us to keep fighting together with partners like Canada, one of our most reliable partners in France for many, many decades, or even longer than that. So we certainly will win this war. Certainly, we don't know when it exactly happens, but together we will certainly make it happen.
Does that mean then that you don't hold a lot of hope for the peace talks that are happening with the involvement of the United States and Russia?
Firstly, we are really ready to be engaged in any discussions at all levels. And we are ready to work as constructively as possible and as fast as possible. But certainly, we need Russians to be really engaged in these negotiations. And for that to happen, we need to become stronger in our position, negotiating position, institutionally, financially, militarily. Certainly, sanctions can be a very good option for all of us to make more economic pressure on Russia, to start negotiations. This is very important. And certainly, we need each and every voice in support of international law, our joint values, human rights. This is the only way.
Because you believe unless that type of pressure is put onto Russia, Russia will not be a truthful player in negotiations?
They're not showing any will. What we see on the ground. If you want to start negotiating, you should stop targeting infrastructure. You should stop killing. You should stop all these atrocities. Then, and you should, for example, as a confidence-building measures, as we diplomats say, why don't you return all the prisoners of war if you're really real in your intentions to stop this war?
Of course, we know that Russia wants territorial concessions from Ukraine in order to sign any type of peace deal. And I was speaking with one military analyst who suggested that Ukraine cannot keep fighting this war just because of the sheer human costs that it is taking out on the country. And his suggestion is that Ukraine negotiate a deal, even if that includes territorial concessions, and years down the road, try to get that territory back. What do you make of that analysis?
Firstly, a lot of different experts, and we are really looking very attentively what people say and what experts advise. But I will go back to 2014. We have had occupied territories like Crimea, like certain areas in Donbass. We will never, ever trade our territories. We will never recognize that they belong to other country. We will never recognize that we lost these territories. Certainly, we'll be looking for a diplomatic solution because, well, all wars end with peace negotiations. But we will never reject these territories, and we will never forget our people, Ukrainians living there. So we are ready to move forward, but without crossing our clear red lines.
Clear red lines, as you say. Now, of course, it was Donald Trump who really pushed for a negotiated end to this war last fall, going into the winter. Are you worried that Ukraine risks losing American support in this war?
First of all, we are really grateful to the current American administration, President Trump and his negotiating team, for investing a lot of efforts to bring an end to these sufferings and bring a peaceful solution. Certainly, we are working with partners. We have the Coalition of Willing, where Canada is a very active participant. Certainly, we have different formats, and we will certainly move with this formats in order to bring an end to this war. But yes, we need American leadership. We need unity among our partners. We need Europeans. We need Canada, certainly. We need Japan and many other countries from all over the world. Because if we show together, send a clear message that international law, despite all the criticism and current reality, it still matters. It will be important for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Well, here we are marking, as I said, a grim anniversary today. And you are now here in Canada. You started in the summer, your new post as ambassador, Ukrainian ambassador to this country. What do you see as your mission while here in Canada? What do you want to share with the Canadian people and the Canadian government?
Certainly, as any ambassador of country posted abroad, the main idea behind this is certainly to develop and further deepen mutual understanding, to develop all different types of cooperation in multiple spheres, to open new spheres, to promote experts, to have investments and many more things to do and to think of. But in our wartime reality, wartime ambassador is certainly first and foremost about having more support and more solidarity from the hosting country, to have unity among political forces, to have more support for Ukraine today, tomorrow, and the decades to come when we are talking, for example, about post-war reconstruction. So we have classical tasks for ambassador, and we have this wartime reality, and we should work simultaneously on to these different spheres.
As a wartime ambassador to this country, are you getting enough from Canada? I hear you say that you're thankful for all that Canada has done already, but what more do you need this country to do?
Canada has always been a steadfast supporter of Ukraine, a strategic leader when it comes to Ukraine and to support Ukrainian people. It started not yesterday, not in 2022, for decades. Canada was among the first Western countries to recognize Ukraine. We have a Ukrainian Canadian community of 1.5 million people who came here, in the 19th century. We have so many things that connect us. Our bonds are so deep. So Canada has been very active. We certainly count on Canada's strategic leadership. Everything that we need is well known to all our partners, starting with air defense systems, which is most urgent need for us, electricity supplies, repairs, certainly microfinancial support, certainly joint production, certainly capacity building, and cultural and economic ties and cooperation. Canada is very active in all of these spheres, certainly. What we want to do and what I want to do as ambassador, I really want to make this cooperation more beneficial for both countries, so that Canadians can understand that supporting Ukraine is only the matter of solidarity, of same values and respect for human rights, but it's also beneficial because it will make our countries prosperous, it will make our societies more resilient.
Ambassador, I appreciate the time today. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Michael, for having me.
Well, one more note on today's anniversary, as Canada did unveil more support for Ukraine today, announcing an extension of Operation Unifier, which commits Canadian forces to train Ukrainian soldiers for an additional 3 years to 2029. $300 million additional dollars announced today for military assistance. That is on top of the $1.76 billion that was already approved for fiscal 26-27. More than 400 armored vehicles, $20 million for the Ukraine Energy Support Fund, and expanded sanctions against Russian oligarchs and companies, including ghost ships that transport Russian oil that the Kremlin relies on to fund its war.
We are tightening sanctions, including on the Shadow Fleet, additional 100 vessels in Russia's Shadow Fleet. This is the fleet that effectively facilitates illegal exports of crude oil. So we're tightening that lifeblood from the Russian economy, along with our allies. Also additional financial sanctions, a lowering of the oil price cap in coordination with the EU and the United Kingdom.
Well, let's turn our attention to here at home now, as the government also unveiled today a new program to build thousands of homes for military personnel, something the Auditor General says is badly needed and a goal that could also help with recruitment. Here now is what we heard from the Defense Minister earlier today.
When they have stability at home, they are better equipped to meet the security challenges of today and the ones we know are coming tomorrow. This investment is going to help us attract and retain the skilled Canadians we need in uniform, the people who keep our country safe. And the good news is applications are up 13% to join the Canadian Armed Forces in the last 8 months.
Well, for some reaction to this new program, we're now joined by retired Colonel Michel Drapeau. He spent 34 years in the military, founding his law firm in 2002 and is the firm's senior legal counsel. Colonel Drapeau, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So, you know, I want to begin here with the Auditor General, because last year she filed a report on military housing, and she described it not only as lacking in number, but also decrepit and substandard. Why was this allowed to happen, given the important role the military personnel play here at home and for Canada abroad?
Well, for a whole lot of reasons. Two of them may be leadership. The senior leadership of the military, in fact, did not bring this enough to the attention of both the Parliament and the public, because, in fact, veterans and their families, or military and their families, were living in substandard accommodation. The report also talked about toilets that weren't working. The general standard of housing wasn't up to date. And we're asking military families to be living in these conditions for years on end, from one beat to the next. So I think a lack of leadership, first and foremost, and second, a lack of funding to the military housing agencies to be able to bring in the necessary repairs and replacement. And that went on for years. In fact, I'm surprised that the Auditor General took so long to get to see it, because in fact it was almost too late to do anything to reverse course, until we had this announcement today. And that's what we need. We need to build new infrastructures, new housing, something which will be modernized and will offer the military something that is up to Canadian standard at the very least.
Well, certainly we've heard that members of Canadian forces are demoralized oftentimes. We've heard also the challenge of recruiting Canadians to actually join Canadian forces. How does this help in terms of housing? How does that help both those goals in terms of raising morale and also raising the numbers, which is a stated goal of D&D?
I think raising morale is the first one, and morale is in fact a law principle. So even if you don't live in PMQs, I might as a senior officer be on the base and not living in a married quarters, but I would be aware of the substandard of housing provided to my soldiers, to the men and women serving in uniform and their families. So those two things combined, just it's a cry, in fact, for help, a cry for recognition. Those military are not going to sustain this kind of abandonment for too long. It's having an effect on morale. If you don't have good morale, very hard to recruit and very hard to retain people. And that's the issues that we're dealing with at the moment.
So here we have the government committing to building more than 7,000 units. I think the Auditor General report said that there needed to be about 7,200 new units, 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms. This aims to have about 7,500 by the time the builds are done. Is that enough? It meets what the AG has put out, but is that enough?
I don't think it's enough, but it's a hell of a good start. So I don't think it's enough. Keep in mind, many of those military families living in married quarters, some of the time their husband or wife or both of them are asked to depart and to serve in Latvia or Poland or someplace else. So there is a double requirement not only to ensure that your family is in safe and correct hygiene perspective quarters, but when you are deployed for 6 months or 8 months and you know before you leave that the family is not looked after and the quarters are substandard, then we got a bigger issue. No, I think 7,000 is a good start. It's going to take them a few years to get to this, but to replace the stock, it probably require another 5,000 or 6,000.
Now the government, this government in particular, it talks much more about military investment than the last Liberal government. They, not only with the defense industrial strategy, but also again with this housing. Does that give you hope that the concerns have been raised by active members of Canadian forces as well as veterans are being now addressed?
I think so. I think the government recognizes it and is taking a positive action, very substantive action to correct that. So we have deadlines for it, and we know exactly how many new housing will be built by at least at certain major bases in some cases, particularly when we have Army Brigade Station. I'm talking about Petawawa, Edmonton, and the like. Those can look forward to the near future where there are going to be new housing for them.
Okay. Well, we'll see how it progresses over the years. Colonel Drapeau, always appreciate the time. Good to see you. Thank you for this.
Bye.
While Parliament was on break last week, the federal government unveiled its new defence industrial strategy, a plan that aims to strengthen Canada's military capabilities, invest in new technologies, and build domestic industries here at home. Now, the strategy will help guide the billions of dollars Canada will spend in the next decade, money it will spend to meet the 5% NATO target by 2035, while ensuring that jobs are also created in Canada. Take a listen to what we heard from the International Trade Minister last Tuesday.
Too often, Canadian defence dollars left this country instead of strengthening our own industries and workers. That ends now. This strategy sets a clear target. 70% of Canada's defence procurement will go to Canadian firms. That means more contracts staying here, more jobs created here, more innovation done here, and more Canadian companies scaling and exporting to the world.
Well, to talk about this, we're now joined by Dana O'Born. She's the Chief Strategy Officer with the Council of Canadian Innovators, which is made up of Canadian tech firms that are looking to scale up, or I guess in other words, Dana, to be bigger players. Thank you for joining us, Dana O'Born.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It's great to be here.
Now, you and your organization, you are supportive of this new defense industrial strategy, but you're worried, based on what I was reading, that it could prove to be only aspirational and not operational. Canada, reputationally does not have a great track record when it comes to military and defense procurement. What exactly are your concerns here?
So maybe if I can just frame the question by letting viewers know that CCI is an organization, a business council dedicated to helping high growth, scaling Canadian headquartered technology firms. So we welcomed the strategy. We thought it was really good news on the face of it. But as all things, the proof is in the pudding, if you will. And so I wouldn't characterize it as a concern. It's just now the real work needs to get done. And so we recognize that, these big policy documents obviously lay sort of the pathway for the next steps. But as you heard on the clip, as we were listening in the introduction, 70% of contracts to go to Canadian companies, that's a lot of work. And so what we're hoping to see is what is what is really going to come into the details? How do these Canadian companies get access to some of those contracts? And what does that look like from a long-term industrial-based growth for Canada's defense sector? Because really, that's what we've got to kind of prove to our global nations and to hit those NATO targets, as you mentioned, on the front end.
Yeah, and as you said, 70%, that is a lot of jobs. Do Canadian firms have the capacity, the capability to meet that kind of goal?
I love that question because I think that we are really underdogs in the defense space. So this last summer, when the newly assigned cabinet was named, we spent some time in Ottawa with a number of politicians, including Minister Joly and others, who really incited this idea that a defense industrial strategy is coming. And we turned around to our members and the broader ecosystem, and we thought, well, if it's coming, we've got to make sure that the government knows who's out there and who they can buy from. So we actually mapped over 430 dual-use Canadian headquartered companies, and not just startups, but companies that were already exporting globally. So the question of capacity and capability is certainly a real one, but the proof is in the numbers, and that is that we definitely have that capacity in Canada. Now, bridging what the government needs and what the CAF needs with the capabilities that already exist out there, that's another story. But, you know, we hear about the Defense Investment Agency being a catalyst for a lot of these connections, and that's very promising. So if the two sides really get together and work together, I think that we're going to have a really great long-term strategy out of this defense industrial strategy.
Okay, so what exists in that space then, or what should exist that space? You're talking about these two arms coming together, but what can bridge that? What do companies actually need in Canada to make sure that Canadian businesses, _Canadian, benefit from this strategy?
Well, it's interesting because the whole concept of Buy Canada, I mean, we've seen this from our Canadian politicians, not only at the federal level, but at the provincial level. And so now the question is, well, what is a Canadian company? And we've done some work on this at the council, and we know that other organizations across the country have too. And I think the government really needs to think long and hard about how we want to not be protectionist in the sense that, you know, we can't have supply chains that don't integrate other companies that are based outside of Canada. We have a long-standing history of buying from foreign-based firms in Canada, and we're not sitting here saying that it needs to be all Canadian all the time, but having a better understanding of that definition of what a Canadian company is and how it operates in Canada, I think, is a defining factor. The other piece that goes along with, you know, marrying those two sides is kind of eliminating a gap of knowledge that exists between the procurement process, which is very complicated and quite complex, and moving quickly and making sure that companies know what procurements are out there, what priorities the government has, when those priorities are surfacing, and really seeing the government move quite quickly to make sure that Canadian companies move through that pipeline.
It sounds like what you're really asking for here is clearer communication about needs and guidelines.
I think so. And I think, you know, the task is with this new Defense Investment Agency as well, that with all of these numbers and all of these dollars and all of these very ambitious policy targets, that the government really needs to be out there and talking to Canadians, working with the CAF, having former and current CAF members really involved in a lot of the procurement decisions, moving very quickly. My fear, the thing that up at night, you have this large NATO spending commitment, and if we can't get the right Canadian companies into the supply chains, then we're just going to default to a lot of the things that we've been doing historically, which is going with the large foreign multinationals, and that's not going to do us any favors in our economic situation. You'll recall before tariffs and before this whole conversation around sovereignty, we were having a very serious conversation about productivity in this country, and procurement is an economic driver. Procurement is a lever to help grow the economy. And so this is something, notwithstanding the defense industrial strategy that the council has been talking about for years, but now we have this beautiful policy document, so we've got to get to work.
Okay, well, and that just begins the conversation. It's a week-old policy. You and I will speak again. But for now, Dana, thank you for starting the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Tuesday. I'm Michel Drapeau. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.